History is not what is written in the books. History is what survives the sand. For 3,000 years, the greatest secret of the ancient world lay just inches beneath the feet of those who claimed it didn't exist. They called this place the Valley of the Kings, a silent, scorched canyon where the sun turns the rocks into an oven. By 1922, the world's greatest archaeologists had given up. They said the valley was empty. They said every gold mask had been stolen, every tomb had been looted, and every story had been told. But they were wrong. Beneath the rubble of a forgotten era, a boy was waiting. A king whose name had been chiseled off the walls. A pharaoh who had been deleted from history by his own people. He wasn't a conqueror like Ramses. He wasn't a builder like Thutmose. He was a fragile teenager, a son of a religious revolution that tore Egypt apart. He was a boy born into a world of gold and blood, forced to wear a crown that was far too heavy for his head. Tonight, we peel back the bandages. We dive into the shadows of the most famous discovery in human history. This isn't just about the 110 kilograms of solid gold. This is about a biological tragedy, a desperate love story, and a murder mystery that took 3 millennia to solve. From the heretic palaces of Amarna to the dark, cramped tunnels of the valley, this is the definitive story of the king who lived twice. This is Tutankhamun. Part 1. The Herald of the Silent Sun. The desert does not speak in words. It speaks in the shifting of dunes, the howling of the Kamsin wind, and the long blue shadows that stretch across the limestone cliffs of the west bank of the Nile. For over 3,000 years, this silence was absolute. Beneath the feet of unsuspecting nomads and travelers lay a secret so heavy that the earth itself seemed to hold its breath. This is the Valley of the Kings. To the ancients, it was Ta Seket Ma'at, the Great Field. It was never meant to be a place for the living. It was a city of the dead, a stone library of the soul. Behind every hidden door and down every plunging staircase, a king lay in a cocoon of gold, surrounded by the spells of the Book of the Dead, waiting for the sun to rise in the underworld. By the turn of the 20th century, the world believed this library was empty. The great explorers of Europe had arrived with their shovels and their dynamite. They had found the magnificent halls of Ramses the Great. They had unsealed the corridors of Seti I. They declared that the valley had given up its last ghost. They believed that history was a closed book. They were looking for the giants, the conquerors, the builders of monuments. They weren't looking for a shadow. They weren't looking for a boy. But deep in the forgotten archives of the priests, a name had been scratched out. A memory had been murdered. To find the boy king, we must first look at the man who nearly destroyed Egypt. We must look at his father, the heretic. Imagine Egypt at the height of the 18th dynasty. This was the Golden Age. The Nile was a highway of cedar ships and linen sails. The temples of Karnak were so vast, they felt like stone forests. The high priests of Amun-Ra were the most powerful men on the planet, darker than the shadows of their own sanctuaries. They controlled the land, the grain, and the very gods themselves. Then came a prince named Amenhotep. He did not have the heart of a warrior. He had the eyes of a fanatic. He looked at the priests and he saw a cancer. He looked at the hundreds of gods, the crocodiles, the cats, the jackals, and he saw a lie. In the 5th year of his reign, he committed an act of religious war. He closed the temples. He banned the name of Amun. He declared that there was only one source of life, the Aten, not a god in human form, but the raw, terrifying power of the sun disk itself. He changed his name to Akhenaten. He was a revolutionary, a man who wanted to strip away the mask of the old world. He took his beautiful queen, Nefertiti, and their daughters, and he turned his back on the thousands of years of tradition in Thebes. He marched his army into a desolate, sun-scorched plain in Middle Egypt, a place where no god had ever been worshipped. There he commanded a city to rise from the dust. He called it Akhetaten, the horizon of the sun. This was a city built on a dream, but paved with desperation. It was a place of light, vast open-air temples where the sun could strike the altars directly. No more dark rooms, no more hidden priests. But as the white limestone walls rose, the rest of Egypt began to starve. The infrastructure of the nation was tied to the old temples. When the temples closed, the economy collapsed. It was into this atmosphere of religious fever and national decay that a child was born. In the heart of the royal palace of Amarna, a baby's cry broke the silence. He was named Tutankhamun, the living image of the Aten. But his birth was no celebration of health. Science has now pulled back the veil on his bloodline. To keep the royal line divine, Akhenaten had married his own sister. This boy was the product of a genetic trap. He was born with a cleft palate that made it hard to speak. He was born with a left foot so twisted he would never run. He was a frail, delicate bird, born into a cage made of gold and sunbeams. As a toddler, the prince walked through a city that was already beginning to die. He would have seen his father, the king, becoming increasingly distant, writing poetry to the sun while his generals sent frantic letters from the borders. "The Hittites are coming," they cried. "The empire is falling." Akhenaten did not listen. He was a man lost in his own light. Then the shadows returned. A terrible plague, perhaps the first great pandemic in history, struck the Sun City. The royal family began to vanish. Tutankhamun's sisters, his mother, his relatives, one by one they were carried to their tombs. And finally, the sun set on Akhenaten himself. The heretic king was dead, and he left behind a 9-year-old boy to inherit a broken world. Think of the weight on those small shoulders. A 9-year-old boy, limping on a cane, standing in the middle of a deserted city. The priests of the old gods were returning, their eyes full of vengeance. The generals were demanding war. The boy was a puppet in a game of giants. Under the guidance of his advisors, the old Vizier Ai and the general Horemheb, the boy was forced to commit the ultimate betrayal of his father. He was told he must leave the Sun City. He was told he must bring back the old gods. He was told that his father's name was now a curse. In a massive, somber procession, the child king sailed down the Nile, back to the ancient city of Memphis. He changed his name. He killed the Aten in his identity and became Tutankhamun. He was the Restoration King, but he was also a prisoner of his own throne. He was married to his half-sister, Ankhesenamun, 2 children of a failed revolution, clinging to each other as they tried to rebuild a kingdom that hated where they came from. This was the beginning of his reign, a reign of ghosts, a reign of restoration, and a reign that would end in a mystery that would remain buried for 3,000 years. Part 2. The Teenage King and the Shadow of Eternity. The boy who left the Sun City of his father was no longer just a child. At 12, 13, and 14 years old, Tutankhamun was learning the brutal language of power. He had moved the capital back to Memphis and Thebes, but he was living in a world of whispers. Every stone he restored, every temple he reopened, was an apology for his father's sins. But let us step away from the gold for a moment and look at the boy himself. What was it like to be Tutankhamun? Imagine the heat of a Memphis afternoon. The smell of lotus blossoms and heavy incense drifts through the palace. The king is sitting on his throne, but he is not comfortable. Modern science tells us that his body was a battlefield. Every step he took was a victory over pain. Because of the bone disease in his foot, he didn't walk like the powerful pharaohs of the past. He limped. He leaned on staff after staff. We found over 130 of them in his tomb, some plain and functional, others encrusted with gold and lapis lazuli. Yet, in the official art of the time, he is a conqueror. We see him standing in a golden chariot, his bow drawn, crushing the enemies of Egypt under his wheels. This was the great lie of kingship. He had to project strength to a people who were terrified that the gods had abandoned them. He was a teenager, wearing a mask of divinity over a face of exhaustion. In this gilded cage, there was one person who truly knew him, Tutankhamun. She was his wife, his half-sister, and his only true ally. They were the last two leaves on a dying family tree. Their relationship, recorded in the gold leaf scenes of the tomb, is one of the most intimate in all of ancient history. We see them in their private garden. She is leaning in to hand him a bouquet of flowers. She is rubbing scented oils onto his shoulder. These aren't the cold, stiff poses of other pharaohs. These are the touches of two young people who only had each other in a palace filled with ambitious old men. But their love was haunted by a desperate need, an heir. The 18th dynasty, the family that had ruled Egypt for 250 years, was standing on the edge of a cliff. If Tutankhamun died without a son, the line of the Sun Kings would end forever. And they tried. Oh, how they tried. Hidden in the shadows of the king's treasury, Howard Carter found a plain wooden box. Inside were two small coffins. For years, the world ignored them. But modern DNA testing has revealed a heartbreaking story. Inside were the mummified remains of two baby girls. One was born too early. The other lived just long enough to draw a single breath of desert air before falling silent. Imagine the grief in the palace. The king, who could barely walk, and his queen, who had now buried the future of Egypt twice. Every time they looked at those tiny coffins, they knew the vultures, the Vizier Eye, and the General Horemheb were circling closer. Now, we reach the final act of his life. The year is 1323 BC. Tutankhamun is 19 years old. He is finally reaching an age where he might take power back from his advisors. He is starting to act like a king. And then, disaster strikes. For decades, we thought he was murdered. We saw the hole in his skull and imagined a shadowy assassin in the night, a blow from a heavy mace while the king slept. But the CT scans of the 21st century have told a different, perhaps more tragic story. The scans revealed a horrific fracture in his left thigh bone. It wasn't a clean break. It was a compound fracture that had shattered the bone and torn through the skin. How did it happen? Was it a fall from a chariot during a high-speed hunt? Was he kicked by a horse? Whatever the cause, in the year 1323 BC, it was a death sentence. We can see the final days. The king is trapped in his bed, burning with a fever that no physician can cure. The malaria parasites found in his blood are ravaging his already weakened immune system. Gangrene, the black death of the flesh, is creeping up his leg. He is gasping for air in the suffocating heat of the palace, while his young wife prays to gods that have gone silent. When he finally drew his last breath, the panic was immediate. Tutankhamun was dead, and he had left no one to take his place. There was no time for a grand funeral. There was no time to build a massive tomb. The priests had 70 days, the holy time of mummification, to prepare him for eternity. They worked in a frenzy. They took a small, private tomb meant for someone else and expanded it in a hurry. They stacked his chariots like furniture in a warehouse. They painted the walls so fast that when Carter opened the tomb 3,000 years later, he found brown spots on the murals, ancient mold that had grown because the paint was still wet when they sealed the door. As the stone was slid into place, the name of Tutankhamun was already being erased from the outside world. The Vizier Eye took the throne, and the General Horemheb prepared his armies. They wanted the world to forget the boy who had failed to provide an heir. But they didn't know that the desert was his protector. They didn't know that by burying him in a small, forgotten hole and covering it with the rubble of other tombs, they were granting him the only thing a pharaoh ever truly wanted: Undisturbed Immortality. Part 3. The Obsession of Howard Carter. For 3,000 years, the world moved on. Empires rose and fell. The Roman legions marched across the sands. The desert winds buried the temples of the Nile, and the name Tutankhamun became nothing more than a ghost, a whisper lost in the shifting dunes. By the year 1900, the Valley of the Kings had become a playground for the wealthy and the curious. It was a place of dust and legends. Most archaeologists believed the valley was exhausted. They had found the great tombs of Ramses and Thutmose, and they declared that every grain of sand had been sifted. They were convinced that the golden age of discovery was over, but there was one man who refused to listen. His name was Howard Carter. Carter was not a man of high society. He was a son of a painter, a man who had arrived in Egypt as a teenager with nothing but a sketch pad and a sharp eye. He was stubborn, difficult, and possessed by a singular obsession. While others were looking for the grand monuments of famous kings, Carter was looking for a ghost. He had found small clues, a cup here, a piece of gold foil there, all bearing the name of a forgotten boy king. He was convinced that Tutankhamun's tomb was still out there, hidden beneath the feet of the men who claimed there was nothing left to find. But archaeology is a rich man's game, and Carter was broke. He needed a patron, a gambler who was willing to bet on a dream. He found that man in Lord Carnarvon. Carnarvon was a wealthy English aristocrat who had come to Egypt for his health. He was bored, he was rich, and he loved a long shot. For 6 long years, from 1917 to 1922, Carter and Carnarvon poured their lives and their fortunes into the valley. Imagine the scene: thousands of tons of limestone rubble being moved by hand in the suffocating heat. Season after season, they found nothing. The world laughed at them. The money was running out. By the summer of 1922, Lord Carnarvon had had enough. He summoned Carter to his estate in England and told him, "It's over. I'm cutting the funding." Carter, in a moment of pure desperation, made an ultimatum. He pulled out his maps and pointed to a small triangular patch of sand that they had missed, a spot covered by the ancient huts of workers from 3,000 years ago. He told Carnarvon, "Give me one last season. If I find nothing, I will pay for it myself." Carnarvon, seeing the fire in Carter's eyes, agreed. One last chance. November 1922. Carter returned to the valley with a sense of finality. On November 4th, the work began to clear away the ancient stone huts. At 10 o'clock in the morning, a sudden silence fell over the dig site. A young water boy, while digging a hole to rest his jars, had struck something hard beneath the sand. It wasn't a rock, it was a step. A stone step cut directly into the bedrock. Carter's heart must have been pounding in his chest. As his workmen cleared the sand, more steps appeared. 6, 12, 16, and there at the bottom was a sealed door. Carter leaned in, his breath fogging on the ancient plaster. He saw the seal of the royal necropolis, the jackal god and the 9 captives. But he didn't open it. Not yet. He was a man of honor and discipline. He ordered the stairs to be filled back in with sand to hide them from thieves. He sent a telegram to Lord Carnarvon in London that travelled across the sea. At last have made wonderful discovery in valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact. For 2 agonizing weeks, Carter waited. He lived in the valley, watching the patch of sand, barely sleeping. Finally, on November 23rd, Carnarvon and his daughter arrived at the Luxor train station. The moment had come. The stairs were cleared again. They reached the door. Carter took a crowbar and pried a small hole in the upper corner. He inserted a candle to test for foul gases. The hot air escaping the tomb made the flame dance. Behind him, in the absolute darkness of the tunnel, Lord Carnarvon couldn't stand the silence. "Can you see anything?" he whispered. Carter's eyes were adjusting. In the flicker of the candle, he saw glints of metal, strange animal-shaped statues, golden couches, chariots stacked on top of each other. It was a chaos of gold, unlike anything the human eye had seen in 3 millennia. He turned back to Carnarvon, his voice trembling, and said the words that would echo through history. "Yes, wonderful things." They were standing on the threshold of a lost world. The boy king was no longer a ghost. He was waiting for them in the dark, surrounded by the treasures of a forgotten empire. The long silence was over. Part 4. The Golden Reign of Eternity. When Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon finally stepped into the burial chamber, they weren't just entering a room, they were stepping into a time machine. The air they breathed was 3,000 years old, scented with the faint, lingering aroma of dried flowers and sacred resins. Before them stood a wall of gold. It was a massive shrine, so large it nearly touched the ceiling of the cramped room. Carter realized with a shock that this was just the outer shell. Like a set of divine Russian dolls, there were 4 nested shrines, each made of heavy oak and covered in shimmering gold leaf. It took the team months of painstaking work to dismantle these shrines. Every movement had to be calculated. One slip of a hammer could destroy a masterpiece. But as they peeled away the layers of gold, they finally reached the heart of the mystery, the sarcophagus of yellow quartzite. With any system of pulleys and ropes, the heavy stone lid was raised. Inside, wrapped in fine linen, lay the first coffin. It was a golden effigy of the king, showing him as Osiris, the god of the dead. But Carter found not 1, but 3 nested coffins. The second was wood covered in gold and inlaid with multicolored glass. But the third took their breath away. It was made of 110 kilograms of solid 22-carat gold. As they raised the lid of this final golden coffin, they saw it, the golden death mask. This is the face that the world now knows. 24 pounds of polished gold, with eyes of obsidian and quartz, and a beard of lapis lazuli. It was a face of eternal youth, calm and distant, looking out from the depths of time with a gaze that seemed to pierce the very souls of the men standing in that room. But beneath the mask lay the reality of death. When Carter finally unsealed the linen wrappings, he found a tragedy. Because the priests had poured too much sacred resin over the body, the oils had hardened like concrete, chemically burning the king's skin and fusing him to the bottom of the coffin. In his desperate attempt to study the body, Carter had to use heated knives and even saws. The boy king was broken into pieces by the very man who wanted to save him for history. For decades, the mummy of Tutankhamun lay in his tomb, a silent witness to the world's curiosity. But in the 21st century, the king began to speak again, not through magic, but through science. In 2005, a mobile CT scanner was brought to the valley. For the first time, we could look through the blackened skin and see the bones beneath. We saw the evidence of a 19-year-old boy who was far from the perfect god shown in the statues. We saw the cleft palate. We saw the twisted foot. We saw the evidence of severe malaria. And we finally found the smoking gun of his death. It wasn't a blow to the head as we once thought. It was a horrific fracture in his left leg, just above the knee. A fracture so deep it had likely caused a massive infection. We can now picture the final moments. A young man, weakened by genetic illness, suffering from a fever, falling from his chariot during a hunt. He was a teenager who died in pain, far from the glory of the battlefield. But what is the true legacy of Tutankhamun? Is it the gold? Is it the curse that allegedly claimed the life of Lord Carnarvon just months after the discovery? Or is it something more human? Tutankhamun was a boy who lived in a time of total chaos. He was tasked with fixing a broken world before he even knew who he was. He was a son who had to erase his father's memory to save his people. He was a husband who buried 2 daughters before he reached his 20th birthday. In the end, the most powerful thing about Tutankhamun isn't his wealth. It's the fact that he was nearly forgotten. His name was chiseled off the walls. His tomb was covered in rubble. He was meant to be a ghost in a desert of silence. But by a miracle of chance, he became the most famous human being to ever walk the banks of the Nile. Ancient Egyptians believed that to speak the name of the dead is to make them live again. By that logic, Tutankhamun is more alive today than he ever was in 1323 BC. Every time a child looks at his golden mask in a museum, or a traveler whispers his name in the Valley of the Kings, he lives. He has achieved the one thing every pharaoh ever dreamed of: true, literal immortality. The boy king has finished his journey. He has crossed the river of the underworld and found his place among the stars. The sand has given up its greatest secret, and the world will never look at the desert the same way again.